I've heard it said that if you don't make too many mistakes, then you don't really have to do so much right, because you didn't really do so much wrong to make up for. And it's really true in life. A lot of times we tend to praise people who put in a lot of work or a lot of effort, the people who try the hardest, the people that are always running around, always chasing something. But the truth is, a lot of the things people do, that they spend time and money and energy on, are just compensating for the mistakes that they made before. So if you plan poorly in your life and you wind up in a bad situation because you didn't plan on the front side, and then you work really hard and you save yourself later on, are you really living a better life than the person who just didn't make the mistake to begin with? And I see it in workplace situations pretty often. There's people who wind up doing pretty well overall, and they're not necessarily the people who are visibly putting in the most effort all the time. They're not necessarily the people who are freaking out and frantic. They're oftentimes just the people who are better at figuring out what their priorities are. I have a tendency to be judgmental of people who have dogs. I like dogs, don't get me wrong. But I like to go for a walk around the neighborhood, and started to notice that there's dogs that like to bark at me when I go by. I look at them, and it's just kind of obnoxious. You're just minding your business, you're trying to enjoy a evening walk, and there's this snarling, howling, barking dog behind a fence that sees you a block away and starts making all the noise it possibly can. And then you look in the yard and you see the yard is all tore up, just pretty much a mud patch, because the dog has been in there going back and forth, destroying any grass which may once have been there. And then you think, well, why do these people even have a dog if the dog's just outside destroying their yard? And I'm sure that they think to themselves, well, you know, my dog is going to help keep my house safe. It's going to deter maybe thieves or something, or anyone who might want to break in. And, you know, it's good. It's helping me. But the reality is, it's just costing the owner. It's costing them to feed it, to take care of it. It's costing the lost property value from having a yard that's been destroyed. It's costing, in a way, maybe a lost reputation from neighbors who don't want to hear it barking all the time. But the perception of the individual might be, well, I need this. You know, I need to have this dog because I just got to do this. But is it really helping? Or is it just an extra thing that they have layered on, and now it's another thing that needs to be managed on top of all the other things in their life that they're not managing? You look in people's yards and you see people, they got a bunch of these old beat up cars sitting out there. And I'm sure they're thinking, well, I'm going to fix up this car one of these days. You know, I've got to get around to it, and then I'm going to do this project. I'm going to fix it up, and it's going to be good or whatever. But is it ever going to really happen? No, probably not. The old nasty cars are going to sit there rusty for probably as long as those people live there. And then they're going to get old and sell their house or something, and eventually somebody's going to have to pay to take all those junk cars to the scrap yard. And they would have been better off if they just didn't hang on to them to begin with. You know, you don't have to have tons of flowers in the yard and everything be all manicured and perfect and everything. Like, just don't have the garbage there. Just don't have the nasty dog that's digging holes. You know, just the basic stuff, right? Like, you don't have to go out of your way to make your life measure up so much. Just don't do things that deliberately lower your value. And that leads me to the topic of withholding, of abstaining from things. You know, if you ever have fasted, you take a day and you just don't eat for maybe a day. It can be good for your mind and good for your body to take a rest from constantly eating. But more specifically, what fasting will do is potentially, if you're trying to burn calories, if you fast for a period of time, then what happens is your body stops living off of the calories you're eating, and instead it starts burning the fat that you already have in reserve. And then that's where you potentially maybe lose some of that weight you were trying to lose or something like that. The point I'm getting at is, when you abstain from the continual consumption of things, then that gives your body and mind an opportunity to take stock of what adds value and what doesn't, what's important and what isn't. And it's the same thing with relationships, with people, with all the different things that we have in our routines and in our lives. If you take a break from something, if you set down the phone and you don't keep on reaching out to people, and you kind of just maybe allow some of those things to go by the wayside, then what you'll find is you're sending a powerful message to others, and they may value you more if you pursue them less, because you're building on fundamentals, that your life has value and you don't need other people to measure up against. And sometimes when you let people go, then it puts into perspective to them that they need to up their game, that they have to figure out what they can offer you versus always expecting you to be there for them. It's kind of like if you were doing business. If the customers stop coming, that's when you're going to want to start lowering your prices, putting things on sale, right? Because as a merchant, you're going to realize people aren't lining up at the door trying to buy from me. So I've got to figure out how to sweeten the deal. I've got to figure out how to make sure that I am serving my customers. And it's the same thing in social relationships. People can start to get really needy, and they can get really aggressive and controlling and manipulative because they think you need them more than they need you. And so they're under no obligation to really do right by you. They just do whatever they want because they figure you'll always be there. You need them. But if you take a few steps back, then people might realize that good relationships have to be a two-way street. And sometimes they're not. Sometimes when you take a break from something, it winds up being a permanent break because you realize that some elements in your life, some things, some people are just gone. You stop continuing those toxic relationships. You just let them fall by the wayside, and you realize you're better off without them. It's kind of like going back to the allegory of fasting. You might wind up taking a break from eating, and then you'll eat better later, or maybe you just give up a few things. Like you realize you don't need to go to McDonald's anymore because it's not good for your health, and you feel better without it. And when you stop doing it all the time, you realize, why would I want to go back and start that habit again? Because in hindsight, I realized it wasn't ever really good for me to begin with. For me, it was kind of like that with Starbucks. I used to go there all the time. I used to drink energy drinks all the time. And some of the stuff, I gave it up. I stopped it. And then down the road, after the habit was broken, then I looked back at it and I thought, well, why would I want to go back to that habit? Because it cost me a bunch of money. It wasn't necessarily good for my health and stuff like that. So some of those things are just let it be. I don't need to do that anymore. So all things considered, it's good to sometimes take a break. It's good to step back from people. It's good to step back from things, from hobbies, from habits, and just let them rest. Farmers do it with their fields. They have their fields that are planted and growing, and then afterwards there's a season where they're just left to rest, and there's no more growing there for a period of time, for a season. Doesn't mean never again. It's just sometimes you have to let things rest so that you can get the nutrients replenished in the soil again, get the ground ready to be fertile for when the time for growing comes again. Patience is important, and it's important to be able to take a step back from things in your life that are toxic. So, I'll close with this thought. Faith is something we use to fill a question mark. When we don't know something, then we can have faith. Faith to fill the gap. Faith that even though we don't have complete understanding, we can still believe that there is a higher purpose, a higher meaning. But then faith is not an alternative for fact. Faith doesn't mean that we stop caring about reality. It doesn't mean we put blinders on and say, okay, I'm a man of faith, therefore I'm not going to acknowledge the truth because faith is more important than fact. To the contrary, there's a point where when you have faith, you also have to acknowledge that knowledge will come to you. Truth will make itself apparent. And whenever you understand a truth that you didn't understand before, when new facts come to light, when new truths come to light, it's important that we're willing to change our position. It's important that we're willing to surrender what had been a source of faith and yield it to the facts of a matter. Sometimes we hang on to old things because we're afraid to let them go. But faith without being rooted in truth is empty. So it's important for us to be able to let things go. I think there's a lot of people who can't let things go. Maybe that's one of the failings of old age, that people get brittle and set in their ways, and they start to have this attitude that the position that they've always had is the position they always will have. And at a certain point, it doesn't matter what the truth is, because they'll never change. They'll never change their mind. Don't be so brittle that you can't change your mind, but don't be so cynical that you can't have faith in the face of the unknown. We should have faith that all things work together for good, but we should also have the discipline to know that if things are not bearing good fruit in our lives, we're not going to hang on to those things. We're not going to continue to return to the same things that repeatedly commit injury in our lives. The same people who betray us, to go back again and again, expecting that if we give them another chance, there will be different results. It's only a fool that does the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Life is sometimes about consistency, but it's also often about moving on. It's kind of like a buffet. It's not about eating everything at the buffet, but it's also not about just putting one thing on your plate either. I think we tend to struggle with the idea of being open-minded to things. We struggle with the idea of changing course because we want things to be permanent. And yet the reality is, if you aren't for yourself, you can't really count on anyone else to be. You've got to be your own advocate first and foremost. You've got to always be on your side. And sometimes that means you have to walk a lonely road. You have to be alone sometimes. That's all right too. So wherever you find yourself, try to find a sense of peace. And remember that things really are exactly what they appear to be. That's a real hard lesson I've found. We always want to make excuses for other people. We always want to tell ourselves some sort of a narrative of why people have a good reason for the bad things they do, or why that one mistake that somebody made was just a once-off and they're not going to do it again. The truth is, though, value is self-evident. It's like cryptocurrency. Everyone talks about the cryptocurrency. It's going to be the next big thing. Maybe it will. I don't know. What I do know is that if I had to tell you what value cryptocurrency creates, what product it generates, I can't tell you that. Because the only thing it really is good for is getting people to buy it and sell it to each other. It doesn't really produce any kind of value. Now, if you look at commodities, if you look at the value of a company that's got buildings and factories and assets, you can count up what it's worth. You can see what it's doing. But a cryptocurrency, sure, it might be valued very highly. And yet the truth is, you can't really explain it in a way that makes sense if you're truly unbiased and open-minded about it. But once people get sucked into that club, of wanting to be in on the next big thing, then the truth stops really being their main focus. And they start to treat investment like a gambling parlor. As Warren Buffett has said, Charlie Munger has said, people who mistake investment for gambling and gambling for investment will probably not meet a good end. I think it's really true that sometimes you can get ahead by putting blinders on and ignoring the truth. You can have a good day by not being honest with yourself and with others. But sooner or later, it all catches up to you. Sooner or later, all the cards get put on the table, and we have to give just and regular account for the lives that we've lived. And if we've built our lives on small lies and mistruths, putting blinders on and not facing reality, at some point it all catches up. So always go back to that simple barometer. What kind of fruit does the tree bear? And if it bears good fruit, then it's probably a good tree. If it doesn't bear good fruit, it's probably not worth keeping around. And that might be a hard lesson. Hard because it means that instead of having a comfortable fantasy, you have to face the reality of being alone. And yet, you can't begin if you aren't willing at first to step away. So don't be too tied down to any idea. Always be willing to embark on a new adventure. Remember, life isn't really about you. It's not really about anybody else either. We're all part of something greater than ourselves. And the truth is, no matter who we are, our opinions, our endeavors, they aren't all that great in the broader scheme of things. So don't let anyone else act like your world needs to revolve around them. And at the same time, don't be too convinced that the things that concern you have to be resolved, or that you have to accomplish some great thing in order to find a higher meaning, or that if things don't go your way, that's somehow a terrible problem. Because whether it's clear to us or not, life is unfolding exactly as it should. Regardless of what other people want, regardless of what we want, ultimately truth prevails, whether we choose to see it or not. There is the goddess of justice, stands in a lot of courtrooms in the United States, blindfolded, holding a scale, symbolic of discretion. But there's also another symbol of justice and balance from antiquity, and that's Anubis. Anubis was the jackal-headed god from Egypt, and he also holds a scale. But Anubis holds a scale that has a human heart in one side and a feather in the other, and the scale is balanced. symbolic of the fact that when we reach the end of our lives, our heart should be light as a feather. And in the end, the content of our heart will be weighed against a scale with a feather on the other side. And in order for us to be redeemed, essentially, we must have a clear conscience. I think there's a lot of truth there. You know, it's amazing how people like to have secrets in their life. They like to keep things private. There's nothing wrong with being private. I firmly believe in privacy. There's nothing wrong with expecting other people to mind their own business and allowing your business to be private. But sometimes people are so interested in other people not knowing what they're doing, you can't help but think to yourself, maybe they shouldn't be doing what they're doing. Because if you're so very worried that other people don't find out what you're doing, then maybe you're not making the right call. Because a life well lived is not a life built on secrets and omissions. It's a life where ultimately everything about you could be made known, and ultimately it wouldn't undermine your character in any way, because when you look in the mirror, you don't see anything worthy of condemnation or judgment. We should all live our lives that way, not based on a house of cards that's carefully managed, just based on the truth to the best of our knowledge. Then other people can make of it what they will. And we can rest easy knowing that regardless of how things go, we've had a good life. Best of luck on your adventure. Till next time. Thanks for watching.